December 20th, 1941. Over the South China Sea, 14,000 feet above a rolling sheet of blue water. Lieutenant Junior Grade Edward Mick McClellan tightens his grip on the control stick of his Grumman F4F Wildcat. The heat inside the cockpit is suffocating, his neck damp beneath a leather flight helmet. Below him, a convoy of American tankers heads toward the Philippines, prime targets for the Imperial Japanese Navy. Radio crackles in his ear. Wildcat lead, bogies incoming. Altitude 15,000. Fast movers. Probably zeros. McClellan doesn't need the warning. He already sees them, tiny black specks growing larger, slicing through the sky with predatory ease. Mitsubishi A6M0s. 8 of them, maybe more, flying in loose but confident formation like they own the sky. And in 1941 they do. The Zero is lighter, faster, deadlier. Its wings look like razors gliding through the air. Its pilots, many of them veterans from the Sino-Japanese War, think of American fighters as iron relics, too slow to matter. Among them today is Petty Officer First Class Saburo Ishii, 21 years old, already a rising ace. From his cockpit he smirks. Kare wa Matasono Niko ka, the fat American cat again. The Wildcat. They call it a flying coffin. Slower than the Zero by 60 miles per hour. Poor climb rate. No turn radius worth bragging about. And its wings thick, stubby, like a brick trying to fly. The Japanese joke in ready rooms. If you miss a Wildcat on the first pass, just turn back. It won't be able to escape. They truly believe it. But the Americans carry something heavier than pride today. Orders from Vice Admiral William Bull Halsey. Protect the tankers at all cost. Do not break formation unless fired upon. So McClellan breathes, steadies, watches the Zeros fan out like hawks descending. The sky erupts. Machine guns chatter. Tracers cut the air like strings of burning pearls. A Zero dives past McClellan, so close he can see the pilot's goggles flash. In seconds, Wildcats are being shredded. Wings drilled through, canopies spiderwebbed, engines vomiting black smoke. McClellan feels 3 impacts slam into his fuselage. His Wildcat lurches. Fuel fumes fill the cockpit. Any other plane, a P-40, a Buffalo, would already be a fireball. But the Wildcat doesn't explode. It absorbs it. The self-sealing fuel tanks swell, their rubber linings bloating with gasoline, choking off the leak before it ignites. The armor plate behind McClellan's seat, an inch thick, stops a 7.7 millimeters round meant for his spine. He pulls hard right, the stick trembling in his hands. Another Zero cuts across his nose, smooth, effortless. For a moment he envies the way it flies. But then he sees something else, smoke trailing from its wing root. Someone got a hit. Not a kill, but a hit. That's all a Wildcat needs. Because the F4F can't outturn a Zero. Can't outrun a Zero. But it can survive it. McClellan pushes into a shallow dive, not fleeing, but dragging. He's bait. 2 Zeros follow, closing the gap with ease. At 8,000 feet, McClellan yanks the stick back with every ounce of strength. The Wildcat doesn't snap, doesn't stall. It rolls, a brutal energy-bleeding 1940s steel frame barrel roll. The Zeros overshoot. One drifts right across McClellan's sights. His thumb drops. For .50 Cal Brownings roar. The Zero explodes into a blossom of flame. Its paper-thin skin no match for half-inch slugs. Ishii watches it fall, stunned. He always thought American planes were crude, heavy, laughable. But crude armor is still armor. American fuel tanks don't ignite like fireworks. American guns don't jam after 3 seconds of combat. Something shifts inside him. Not fear, not yet, but recognition. McClellan's Wildcat is barely flying now. Holes through the wings. Oil pouring from the engine. But it still responds. Still climbs. Still holds altitude. He turns toward the convoy, limping home. His plane looks like it should have fallen from the sky 20 minutes ago. But it hasn't. Because the Wildcat wasn't built to dance. It was built to come back. And somewhere above the South China Sea, Saburo Ishii, who has never lost to an American fighter, mutters the quiet truth no Zero pilot ever wants to admit. The cat will not die. December 11, 1941. Wake Island, a speck of coral and sand in the vast Pacific, now a frontline fortress. The morning sun has barely risen when Marine Corps Captain Henry Hammer Elrod slams the canopy shut on his F4F Wildcat. The air still smells of burning diesel from yesterday's bombardment. The Japanese are coming back, and this time nobody doubts the size of the storm. In the makeshift hangar, armorers load the Wildcats with exactly 450 rounds per gun. No more, no less. Extra fuel? Impossible. Replacement parts? None. Armor plating? Bolted on by hand. The U.S. Marines aren't just flying fighters. They're flying last lines of defense. Sirens wail. Radar spots incoming. 27 Japanese bombers and escorting them. The dreaded A6M0. Elrod takes off first. His Wildcat bumps and shudders across the coral strip like it's about to shake itself apart. As the wheels leave the ground, he sees the others rising behind him. 6 Wildcats against nearly 40 enemy aircraft. Every pilot knows what that means. The math is impossible. The orders are not. Scratch 10. Make them pay for every inch. The dogfight begins before altitude is even gained. Zeros dive in elegant arcs, their wings slicing through the air like blades. Their pilots have trained since adolescence. Japanese aviators are not just skilled, they are conditioned. 10 locks onto Elrod's tail. He feels the airframe twitch. 2, 3 for hits. In AP-40, this would be the end. In a Brewster Buffalo, it would be a funeral. But the Wildcat holds. Self-sealing tanks swell again, turning gasoline into sludge instead of fire. Armor plate catches rounds meant for his spine. The engine coughs, then keeps running. Elrod doesn't try to outturn the Zero. He can't. So he does something only Wildcat pilots learn to do. He drops flaps mid-flight. Instant drag. The Zero overshoots, sails clean past. Elrod pulls the trigger. His .50 cal tracers stitch the Zero's belly. It bursts like paper soaked in gasoline. He doesn't cheer. There's no time. Another bomber is lining up on the island's airstrip. He aims, fires in a long, punishing burst. The bomber erupts into flame and nosedives into the sea. By the time the battle ends, Elrod has shot down 2 bombers, 10, and crippled 2 more. His Wildcat looks like it survived an artillery barrage. Wings shredded, fuselage torn, canopy cracked. But it still lands. It still returns. On the Japanese carrier Soryu, the mood is not jubilant. The pilots speak in low, unsettled tones. Why don't they burn? Why do they keep flying? Even when we win, they do not fall. The Zero was built for supremacy. Paper-thin skin for maneuverability, no armor, no tank protection. A masterpiece of offense with no regard for survival. The Wildcat is the opposite. Grumman engineers called it built like a truck. Pilots called it the Ironwork Special. It didn't win by elegance. It won by stubbornness. Wake Island eventually falls, overwhelmed by sheer numbers, starving, outgunned. But when Japanese forces land and examine the wrecked Wildcats, they are stunned. Every plane is full of holes that should have destroyed it. Some have fuel tanks that look like sieves, but never ignited. Some have wings nearly torn off, yet still landed. One cockpit seat is bent inward, proof a pilot took a direct hit and lived. That night, a young Zero pilot writes in his diary, "The Americans do not build birds. They build animals that refuse to die." Across the Pacific, American pilots begin to understand something too. They may not be flying the fastest plane or the prettiest, but they are flying a machine that gives them something no Zero pilot has: a second chance. May 7, 1942. Dawn over the Coral Sea. Aboard the USS Lexington, the flight deck trembles with the roar of radial engines. Pilots of VF-2, the flying chiefs, climb into their Wildcats, buckling in with the weariness of men who know what waits above the ocean. Ensign John R. Jack Nielsen runs a gloved hand along the side of his F4F3. The paint is chipped, the wing patched with sheet metal from a galley door, and a bullet hole remains in the armor plate behind a seat. But the plane runs. The Wildcat always runs. Below deck, the ship rattles as torpedo bombers prepare to launch. Word spreads through the radio circuits. Japanese carriers confirmed. Strike group outbound. Wildcats on escort duty. The pilots know what that means. Zeros will be waiting. The Wildcats lift off first, their Pratt and Whitney engines coughing black smoke before clearing. Rising through a deck of bright clouds, they spot them. The Japanese strike group, already climbing to intercept. Zeros, dozens of them, break formation and fan out like a razor-edged storm. The Americans don't panic. They've learned the hard truth of aerial survival. A Wildcat cannot win a duel in a flat turn, but it can fight vertically. So they climb, dive, zoom, fire, using weight, gravity, and steel to beat balsa, silk, and speed. Nielsen spots a Zero banking left, about to slice into a SBD Dauntless. He dives, not elegant, but violent, the Wildcat shuddering past 300 miles per hour. He fires a burst at 200 yards. The Zero disintegrates into confetti. The Dauntless pilot, shaken but alive, calls over the radio. "Thanks, Chief. I thought I was done." Nielsen doesn't answer. He can't. 2 Zeros are now on him, carving the air behind his tail, close enough he can see muzzle flashes. Rounds slam into his fuselage. Glass fragments spray his cheek. A round tears through the wing root, another through the oil line. The engine screams. But the Wildcat keeps flying. He dives, straight down through a cloud layer, no flaps, no hesitation. The Zeros follow, confident they'll catch and finish him. But Nielsen knows something they don't. A Zero begins to shudder and lose control past 350 miles per hour. The Wildcat does not. At 400 miles per hour, the Zeros pull back, too light to dive safely. Their wings chatter. Their frames groan. Nielsen pulls out low, barely missing the sea surface, and the Zeros break off, beaten not by guns, but by physics, by weight, by American over-engineering. He climbs again, leaking oil, engine coughing, cockpit reeking of fuel, yet still flying. Minutes later, he escorts the battered Dauntless back to the carrier group. One bomber has half a tail. Another has a wing full of holes. A third is missing half its canopy. The only plane in good structural condition is the Japanese Zero Nielsen shot down, because it fell into the sea in one piece. When he lands, his Wildcat rolls to a stop and dies with a tired wheeze, oil spilling onto the deck. A mechanic stares at the damage and mutters, "How the hell is this thing still in the air?" Nielsen just laughs, not from joy, but from exhaustion. Hours later, the Lexington is fatally hit by torpedoes and bombs. She burns, explodes, and is abandoned. But every surviving Wildcat from that day made it back. Even sinking, the ship's captain radios a message to Admiral Fletcher. "Our fighters held." He could have said something else. The Wildcat finally earned the respect of the enemy and the love of the men who flew it. Far away, in the briefing room of the carrier Shokaku, a Japanese lieutenant shakes his head after reviewing gun camera footage. "We shoot them. They leak. They smoke. But they do not die." August 21, 1942. Henderson Field, Guadalcanal. The air is thick with heat, diesel fumes, and the constant drone of insects. A rough runway of crushed coral stretches across the jungle clearing, barely large enough for a Wildcat to take off, and nowhere near long enough for error. The men of the Cactus Air Force sleep in foxholes, eat cold rations, and refuel their own planes because there are no mechanics to spare. They fight at dawn, they fight at dusk, and at night Japanese ships shell the airfield until the ground trembles like an earthquake. Yet every morning, the Wildcats roll out again, dented, patched, scorched, but alive. Captain Marion E. Carl, already one of the top Marine aces, wipes sweat from his brow as he inspects his F4F4. The wings rattle like loose furniture. The fuselage skin has been riveted back together by a carpenter, not an engineer. The landing gear struts creak with every step, but the engine still turns. The guns still fire. And that, in Guadalcanal, is enough. At 0900 hours, the radio erupts. Bogies inbound. Multiple formations. Zeros, Vals, Kates, the whole damn family. The scramble order is automatic. Marines drop tools, sprint to aircraft, kick blocks out from wheels. The Wildcats lift off with 20 seconds between them. No time for warm-up, no time for formation. By the time they reach 10,000 feet, the enemy is already there. A wall of Zeros escorting dive bombers meant to erase Henderson Field from the map. The first clashes are pure chaos. A Zero drops behind Carl and opens fire. Rounds slam into his tail and right wing. Something metallic snaps, probably a control cable. But the Wildcat keeps flying. Carl nosedives, pulls into a zoom climb, and forces the Zero to overshoot. What follows is a maneuver the Japanese have now learned to fear. The thatch weave. Two Wildcats cross paths, one dragging a Zero, the other cutting behind to fire. The Zeros try to follow, but it's like chasing two angry anvils swinging in a circle of steel. Another Zero goes down, then another, then another. The Wildcats can't win by elegance, so they win by teamwork, armor, and brutality. Below, the Japanese dive bombers try to reach the airstrip, but the Wildcats don't let them. If they can't shoot them down, they ram them wing to wing, clawing them out of the sky. By the end of the fight, 24 Japanese aircraft are burning in the sea or jungle. The Marines lose 2 pilots, both bailed out and survived. Captain Carr lands at Henderson with a Wildcat missing half aileron, 11 bullet holes, and a torn exhaust line. When a mechanic removes the seat armor plate, he finds 2 stopped rounds flattened like coins. If this were a Zero, the pilot would already be a funeral photograph framed in black. That night, deep inside the jungle, a Japanese naval flight commander writes a private report to Rabaul HQ. We were told the American fighters were slow, stupid machines. We were not told they could take punishment like iron and fight as packs. He ends the report with a sentence no Japanese officer ever wrote in 1941. Their pilots do not fear us anymore. Something has shifted in the air war. The Wildcat is no longer a punchline. It is a problem. A problem the Zero cannot solve, because no amount of skill can outfly bulletproof fuel tanks and half-inch steel. The laughter is gone now. In its place, respect and caution. October 26, 1942. Dawn over the Solomon Islands. The sea is unervingly calm as Task Force 61 braces for another clash with the Imperial Japanese Navy. Aboard the USS Hornet, the Wildcats of VF-72 are armed, fueled, and sweating in the growing heat. Among the pilots is Lieutenant Commander William Willie McCluskey, a veteran now, though barely 26. He knows the drill. The Zeros will be there first, high and waiting, like sharks circling a lifeboat. But today feels different. The radio briefing had been blunt. Intel suggests the Japanese are short on veteran pilots. Their new replacements lack combat time. Don't underestimate them, but don't fear them. McCluskey looks across the deck at the Wildcats waiting to launch. Some still bear patch plates from Guadalcanal. Some have engines on their second or third overhaul. None of them are pretty, but all of them come home. Launch signal. Radial engine scream. Tailhooks drop. The first wave of Wildcats lift from the carrier deck, climbing through clear sky. And then they see it. A formation of Zeros. But not the elegant, diamond-shaped, perfect formation of 6 months earlier. This one is loose, uneven, nervous. The rookies have arrived. The first Japanese pilot to attack overshoots his mark. His aim is rushed, tracers spraying wild. A Wildcat pulls a climbing turn, and instead of countering, the Zero stalls. Nose drops. He pancakes into the ocean. McCluskey sees it and knows. The tide has turned. Not just the machines, the men. The next Zero dives head-on and opens fire too early, too far for the weak 7.7 millimeters guns to be effective. McCluskey holds steady, closes the gap, and fires a 3-second burst. For .50 cal rounds tear through the Zero's engine, and the fighter blossoms into a black, oily fireball. The dogfight that follows isn't the elegant ballet of 1941. It's a brawl. And the Wildcat, heavy, armored, stubborn, is built for brawling. A Zero latches onto the tail of Ensign Ross Clark. Clark calls out, strained. "I've got one on me. He's not letting go." McCluskey answers with 2 words. "Start the weave." The 2 Wildcats cross, pivot, crisscross again, a steel trap closing inch by inch. The Zero tries to follow the pattern, but the pilot is too green. He turns too tight, bleeds too much energy. His nose rises. He hangs in the air for a fraction of a second. McCluskey fires. The Zero drops like a shot bird. Aboard the Japanese carrier Shokaku, a veteran flight leader watches through binoculars and feels a cold realization settle in. We are no longer the hunters. The Wildcats don't just survive now. They dictate the fight. Hours later, both sides withdraw, battered but unbroken. The Hornet is lost, but the Wildcats have taken a toll no Zero pilot of 1941 would have believed. 38 Japanese aircraft destroyed. 9 Wildcats lost, 7 of their pilots rescued. And for the first time in the Pacific War, a captured Japanese officer admits during interrogation, "Your pilots fly to live. Ours were trained to die. Now we are the ones dying." The age of the Zero's dominance is fading. Not because the Wildcat became faster, not because it learned to turn better, but because it endured long enough for the pilots to outlive their enemies. The Zero was built to win the first year of the war. The Wildcat was built to survive all of it. February 1943. Espiritu Santo, New Hebrides. Rows of battle-scarred Wildcats sit in the humid airfield sun, patched, dented, scorched, and riddled with bullet holes. Some look as if they were dragged through a scrapyard. Yet beside them stand the men who lived because of them. Mechanics run their palms along torn aluminum skins, counting the holes like scars on a veteran's chest plate. A Marine corporal jokes, "If it's not leaking fuel, oil, or hydraulic fluid, it's not a Wildcat." But there's admiration in his voice, the kind only earned by a machine that brings a man home when physics and luck shouldn't have allowed it. By early 1943, the story has fully flipped. The Japanese no longer joke about the fat American cat. They whisper about it. Zero pilots, who once sneered at its weight, now warn rookies. If it is a Wildcat, do not assume it will fall. They have learned the truth the hard way. The Wildcat's .50 cal Brownings don't just damage, they shred. Its armor plate doesn't just help, it turns kills into survivals. Its self-sealing tanks don't just reduce fire, they deny the Zero its greatest advantage, ignition. And most importantly, the Wildcat gives a pilot time. Time to dive. Time to escape. Time to learn. That time is what gives birth to tactics like the thatch weave, high-side attacks, rolling scissors, and the doctrine now drilled into every new U.S. Navy pilot. Right arrow, don't turn with a Zero. Right arrow, fight in the vertical. Right arrow, make one pass. Climb. Reset. Repeat. It is not romantic. It is not elegant. But it turns survival into victory. By mid-1943, the Zero is still feared, but not respected in the same way. Because the Zero's brilliance comes at a cost. No armor. No tank protection. No forgiveness. The Wildcat's flaws, weight, thickness, stubbornness, become strategic assets in a war of attrition. The Americans can train more pilots. They can build more planes. And now, their planes bring the pilots back to fly again. The Japanese lose something far more irreplaceable than aircraft: experience. Every Zero that burns takes a first-rate pilot with it. Every Wildcat that limps home lands another veteran on the next briefing table. By the time the F-6F Hellcat, the Wildcat's deadlier successor, arrives in 1943, the stage is already set. December 1943, Tommy Blackburn, fighter ace, is asked what he thinks of the Wildcat. She wasn't pretty. She wasn't graceful. But she was faithful. She brought boys home who had no business being alive. Years later, a Japanese naval aviator, once a Zero ace, is asked what he feared most. He doesn't say the Hellcat. He doesn't say the Corsair. He doesn't even say the Mustang. He says, the stubborn blue Grumman, the one that would not burn. The Wildcat didn't become a legend because it was the best fighter of the war. It became a legend because it was the fighter that refused to die and forced the enemy to respect it. The Wildcat did not win air supremacy. It survived long enough for America to seize it.